Hi. Let's get started. Thank you for coming this morning to the final of the 4 panels that I led this week at the International Journalism Festival. My name is Justin Peters. I'm from the Columbia Journalism Review in New York City, and the general theme we've been exploring this week is how to do good journalism when all the odds are against you. The specific theme of today's panel is innovating in difficult situations, and I think it's thematically appropriate that this panel comes on the final day of IJF 13. You know, I don't know how it is for you, but I attend conferences like these, and everything that everyone is saying sounds so great. All these wonderful ideas about how to change the way that we're going to be doing journalism, and how reporters can get smarter and better and faster, and all of those wonderful things. And you walk away from here, you get on the train or the airplane, and you're like, wow, that sounds easy. Then you get back to work, and you realize, wow, it's not easy at all. You've got budget shortfalls, you've got editors and other management who are paralyzed by inertia, or just don't really have not set up this sort of situation that makes it easy to innovate. If you're a freelancer, the thoughts of going out there and doing great work on your own are often stymied by the fact that no one is willing to pay you to go out and do good work on your own. If you're starting a small sort of startup of your own, attempts at innovation, or even starting a business like that, are often hampered by lack of money, lack of resources, lack of time. When we talk about innovating in tough situations, pretty much every situation in journalism these days is a tough one, which is why I'm glad to have these 4 gentlemen on this panel with me, because each of them has, I think, done an exemplary job of trying to do what we all want to do and what we all need to do in this very tough situation for journalism that we're sort of in today. And that's the topic we're going to be discussing for the next hour or so. I'd like to introduce the panel to you. From my left, we have Matthew Eltringham, who is the executive editor at the BBC College of Journalism. To his left, we have Mark Little, who is the founder of Storyful. To his left, there's Paul Lewis, the special projects editor for The Guardian. And finally, we have Luca Sofri, founder and editor of ilpost. And Luca, I'll start with you. When I think about the term innovating in tough situations, I can't really think of a tougher situation than starting an online news startup in Italy in 2010, in a country where much of the country does not actually have internet access, and much of the established media is not particularly innovative or really embracing the potentials of the web. And I was wondering if you could take us back a couple years and talk about the challenges that you faced when beginning ilpost, and how you met them in those early years.
Scusate, sono quello anziano e che non vede bene i tasti e ha bisogno di aiuto. Sì, appunto, benché io sia quello del posto e quello italiano, la mia esperienza è decisamente, probabilmente poi ognuna di quelli che sono qui avrà un'esperienza peculiare, ma insomma probabilmente peculiare esattamente per questo, se parliamo di questi temi. Noi abbiamo, faccio una brevissima sintesi, noi abbiamo fondato il Post 3 anni fa, abbiamo appena compiuto 3 anni, e l'abbiamo fatto per molte ragioni diverse e molte ambizioni diverse che si sono saldate e di cui siamo piuttosto contenti dei risultati, ma una di queste, quella che ci interessa di più qui, era cercare di creare, non occupare perché è uno spazio vastissimo, però diciamo di introdursi in uno spazio vastissimo e fino ad allora, ma anche tuttora, adesso un po' meno, fino ad allora molto sguarnito dall'informazione italiana, che era il fronte dell'informazione precipuamente online, ovvero dell'informazione, uno, che era fatta soltanto online, due, che guardava a internet, ai suoi temi, ai suoi lettori, al suo utilizzo, alle sue opportunità, appunto come luogo principale anche rispetto alle scelte editoriali e alle impostazioni generali. Tutto questo appunto in Italia era particolarmente arduo, da una parte particolarmente stimolante per la ragione che vi ho detto, appunto perché il campo era molto sguarnito. Da un'altra parte particolarmente arduo. Adesso non farò dei bilanci sul post, che sono molto soddisfacenti, ma insomma meno interessanti qui. Ma vi dirò un po' di cose appunto sui temi di questa discussione. La prima è che, benché noi oggi siamo visti, e sono delle cose che hanno a che fare più genericamente col contesto italiano, benché noi siamo visti come, adesso non, uno diciamo, degli esperimenti più interessanti e anche diciamo, di risultati più stimolanti e promettenti su questo fronte in Italia, e siamo molto contenti e soddisfatti di quello che abbiamo fatto e quello che corrisponde ai nostri progetti. Io non mi nascondo, non me lo nascondo da 3 anni, che noi stiamo facendo un prodotto pochissimo innovativo. E questo significa 2 cose. Intanto significa dire a noi appunto che abbiamo ancora dei margini di insoddisfazione e di miglioramento molto alti, ma significa soprattutto rivelare che per il quadro generale italiano un prodotto che visto da dentro, visto da noi, visto qui dall'Italia sembra una cosa nuova e particolarmente diversa e più attenta alle cose della rete di tutti gli altri, è su un quadro globale e rispetto a quello che è successo e che abbiamo capito e conosciamo di questo terreno, di questi anni, ancora molto indietro. Noi alla fine, mentre intorno ci sono discussioni e dibattiti che noi seguiamo molto accuratamente e da molti anni con molta curiosità su che cosa possa diventare l'informazione e come possa cambiare il giornalismo nei tempi di internet, come sia già cambiato, noi facciamo un giornale online. Ma voglio dire che facciamo un giornale online molto tradizionale, come avrà presente chi legge il Post, su cui ci sono scelte originali e particolari per l'Italia sicuramente, questo lo sappiamo bene, è una delle ragioni delle sue impostazioni, sui contenuti, sugli stili, sui linguaggi, sull'accuratezza, sull'attenzione alla verità e all'affidabilità delle notizie, sulla gerarchia delle notizie, sui temi e appunto anche moltissimo, con moltissima attenzione sui linguaggi. Ma dal punto di vista della costruzione di un modo nuovo di fare informazione, noi non siamo riusciti a costruire molto, inevitabilmente, per carenza di risorse, perché abbiamo investito quelle poche che abbiamo su tutte le cose di cui vi abbiamo detto, ma abbiamo avuto ben presente in tutti questi anni appunto che nell'agenda ci deve essere per forza questo, e che una volta colmato un gap che per noi era prioritario, appunto di provare a fare il giornalismo, diciamo l'informazione in modi tradizionali ma fatti meglio, bisognerebbe anche cominciare a fare decisamente altro per noi, ma come per chiunque l'abbia letto. È stata una lettura rivelatrice, illuminante, ma anche diciamo, molto confortante rispetto a alcune cose che già pensavamo e sapevamo, questo straordinario testo che si può scaricare da internet in PDF, che si chiama Post-Industrial Journalism, scritto da alcuni autori anglo-americani. Emily Bell era qui a parlarne ieri, perché è un testo che disegna un quadro delle opportunità dell'informazione che sono addirittura avanti rispetto al quadro e al mercato americano, pur riferendosi a quello, ma sono qui assolutamente rivoluzionari persino ai cambiamenti che abbiamo in testa qui e di cui ci riempiamo la bocca qui. Appunto ieri la battuta di Emily Bell, più citata in giro e più ripresa in giro, e che ha gettato nella desolazione una quantità di persone che erano convinte di stare innovando molto nei grandi media italiani attraverso l'integrazione fra le piattaforme e fare insieme il digitale, la carta e tutto quanto, e lei ha detto che non bisogna, e bisogna tenere separata il digitale dalla carta, eccetera, eccetera. Ci sono dentro questo testo che vi consiglio molto di leggere, se vi interessano questi temi, come immagino vi interessino visto che siete qua. Ci sono moltissime cose interessanti. Una di queste, e torno al post, poi chiudo per il momento, una di queste è il rapporto numerico-quantitativo, diciamo, che nasce da una valutazione qualitativa, fra quanto in una redazione ci deve essere di forze dedicate alla redazione, dedicate al giornalismo tradizionale, dedicate all'informazione, tradizionale poi fatto in molti modi diversi, e quanto sulla tecnologia, no? La parte tecnologia. Loro dicono, a un certo punto io non mi ricordo le cifre esatte, ma loro dicono l'ideale sarebbe che oggi una redazione funzionasse con un rapporto di 1-1 fra giornalisti e tecnologia. Naturalmente questo è piuttosto avveniristico per molte redazioni attuali e quindi possiamo immaginare appunto che una quota accettabile e soddisfacente per le opportunità che oggi offre la rete all'informazione sia, loro dicono, non mi ricordo, 1-4, 1-5, una cosa di questo genere. Io vi dico che noi al Post, appunto, che rivendichiamo tranquillamente con un po' di presunzione, ma in realtà non è particolarmente un nostro vanto, ma come vi dicevo un'arretratezza del quadro generale, di essere tra i più bravi e competenti, poi non sempre riusciamo a applicare le nostre competenze per mancanza di risorse in circolazione, il rapporto al Post è di 11-1, 10-1, ecco, in cui quell'1 fa quasi soprattutto lavoro di routine e di diciamo, obbedienza e soddisfazione di esigenze della redazione, ma pochissimo lavoro creativo e costruttivo di opportunità nuove. L'attenuante per noi, e questo è un tema che diciamo, mi incuriosisce e mi sarebbe piaciuto anche parlarne con Ebel, poi non c'è stata l'occasione ieri, l'attenuante per noi, che può essere un'alternativa, è che la redazione del Post ha dentro di sé, dentro della redazione, una discreta quota, diciamo, per quello che è l'informazione tradizionale italiana, di competenze tecnologiche e di competenze sulla rete, i meccanismi della rete, le opportunità di promozione dei contenuti, con tutti gli esempi del caso, la gestione dei social network, la gestione del SEO e molte altre cose di questo genere. Però naturalmente non stiamo parlando di una redazione che fa molte altre cose, non stiamo parlando di una struttura peculiare che si occupa di sfruttare tutte le opportunità ma anche di crearne di nuove, perché come sapete il terreno è molto fertile in questo senso. Ecco, questo, poi ci sarebbero molte altre cose che potrei dire e raccontare e che girano quasi tutte, guardate che questo è un tema che ogni tanto è stato un po' trascurato in diversi panel anche qui a Perugia, dove pure in altri è il tema centrale. La questione centrale che noi usiamo un po' come una formula retorica, ma in realtà è centrale e concreta, di tutto quello che stiamo discutendo è la questione dei business model, delle risorse, dei soldi che girano. Anche qua Emily Bell ieri ha cominciato dicendo appunto una cosa banale, ma che non entra nelle teste di nessuno in Italia, né di chi vuole guadagnare, fare dei soldi, ottenere su delle grandi aziende editoriali, né di chi vuole fare il giornalista e non riesce a trovare gli spazi e i modi e si lamenta appunto che viene sottopagato e ha ragione eccetera eccetera, ma bisogna che questa cosa l'abbiamo almeno chiara, che non ci sono i soldi, non ci sono assolutamente più e non ci saranno più i meccanismi di business e di guadagno che c'erano una volta, salvo diciamo occasioni più rare, particolari e che sono assolutamente da sfruttare e seguire, quello è il fronte eventualmente da sfruttare e seguire, ma mettersi in testa, appunto, come si diceva ieri, che il business dell'informazione diventerà una cosa completamente diversa, non sarà più la cosa di prima, già non lo è, e offrirà delle opportunità di sopravvivenza a dei modelli completamente diversi da quelli di prima. E da tutto questo appunto discende anche la questione dell'innovazione, dei margini di innovazione, delle possibilità di innovazione, poi appunto magari ci sono un paio di esempi, ma magari se c'è tempo, visto che siamo in tanti, ve li racconto dopo.
There we go, there's my microphone. A lot of interesting stuff. And Paul, I'll get back to you in a second, but off that topic of there being no money, I want to jump over to Mark, who is sort of in a similar situation to Luca, in that an established journalist who went off and started his own thing, a couple of years ago. Could you address that? You know, the sort of the question of finding the money and sort of developing the business savvy necessary to sort of sustain this sort of innovation we're all looking for in journalism.
Thank you. Yeah, in 2010, in Ireland, at a time of financial crisis, I had to raise €500,000 to finance a business where there was no market, there was no certainty. I was going to sell news to news companies, and it was a crazy idea, which might just actually work, which is, I suppose, the heart of innovation. And what I was struck by was at the time in 2009, June, was the light bulb moment, and it happens to many journalists who are skeptical or fearful of social media, where they suddenly realized that in this revolutionary moment, we could actually be living through the golden age of journalism, even though newspapers are closing, journalists are losing their job. There were two events in 2009 in June. The first was the protests in Iran at a disputed election. And I was a journalist who was a foreign correspondent for 20 years. I've only ever had two jobs in my life. One was working for the Irish state broadcaster, and the second was founding my own company. But I couldn't go to Iran because there were cutbacks at my station. So I sat at home in Ireland, and I watched as 17-year-olds with camera phones documented a revolution far more effectively than the foreign correspondents who were locked in their hotel rooms repeating third-hand rumor. And I thought, wow, this is a revolutionary moment. What if we could harness the power of this new movement? Wouldn't we have incredible opportunity in journalism? But a week later, I was at a wedding in Ireland, and about 9:30, I saw all the under 25-year-olds with their phones at the bar, and they told me Michael Jackson had just died. And I said, how do you know? I said, well, Twitter just told me. And half an hour later, I was on the dance floor dancing with my mother to Thriller as we celebrated Michael Jackson and his life. And that was 10 minutes before the LA Times reported his death. So in Ireland, in Tipperary, we were dancing to Thriller 10 minutes before he was officially dead in the eyes of the world's media. And that revealed the threat that this, you know, the report of the life and death of somebody could go around the world before anyone had officially confirmed it. So I set up a news agency. I said to myself, what would happen if I set up a news agency from scratch to address the revolutionary potential of social media, but also the risks? And what resulted was Storyful, which is now 3 years old. We work with some of the biggest news organizations in the world, and what we do is discover and verify and monetize the most compelling content that emerges from social media platforms. And I think, just to get to your question, then, Justin, I think for me, there's been a huge amount of contradictions that this endeavor has thrown up. And that's the first thing you have to do. If you're an innovator in journalism, you have to learn to love the phrase cognitive dissonance. And that means when you have two opposing ideas in your mind and you don't go mad. And that essentially is the secret of innovation in news. And so, for example, Luca's examples really resonated with me. People say to you, what's your business model? And, first of all, if I knew, I wouldn't tell you. Secondly, when you start out, you're looking at your main activity and saying that's the thing that's going to generate the value. But then people say to you, well, if you're verifying video from Syria, it's taking you 4 hours to do so. How do you make money out of that? And I always say to them, the Baghdad Bureau never made money for any newspaper. Serious, good journalism never made money. What it did was, it was funded by other activities, like advertising. And so I think in creating a news business in this new environment, don't focus too much on making money from the thing that you know is the heart of what you want to do. Find the other revenue streams that support that. And don't be too proud. And what we do in Storyful is, we supply really hard news video, but we also supply viral videos. We supply the kind of videos that get the views on websites. And, I'm unapologetic about that because that pays for my people to spend 4 hours working out whether that minaret in Aleppo really was destroyed today. And the second thing I would say, just to explain, the contradictions, is that innovation does not mean technology. And people have to very clearly define the distinction between the two. Because if I look at my daughter, who's 8 years old, using her iPad, I'm not looking at the iPad, I'm looking at how she uses it and the sort of tactile, sensual connection she has to information these days. I'm not looking at the RAM or the potential of that particular piece of technology. I'm looking at how she uses it. And that's the key for innovators. Don't get blinded by the technology. Look to the human behavior that it liberates people to engage in. And so I would say, if you are trying to form a news business, there's a principle in physics called the Heisenberg principle, where the act of observing something changes the nature of the thing. What it actually means is, don't worry too much about the object. Just check its momentum, see where it's going, and position yourself where you think it'll be in a year's time. And that's a really good piece of advice, I think, for an innovator in the news business. Don't assume that the world today is the world that will be here tomorrow. And always position yourself where my 8-year-old daughter is going to be when she grows up and starts consuming news. That's the way I think about things. So finally, I'll just follow up with just one final point. There's a huge difference between innovation in a big company and innovation in a startup like my company and Luca's company. Because in a big company, it was driven home to me by one of our clients, and I said to them, you know, you're probably just working with us so you can rip off my ideas and implement them in your big news organization. He started laughing. He said, in our company, to write a line of code, we have to form a committee, which takes a month, and then we write the line of code. So there's no way that we are set up to innovate like this. But there are people, and I think that's why I'm glad to be on the panel with Matthew and Paul particularly, who in big companies have found ways to break out of the kind of corporate mentality and innovate. And part of that is in partnerships with startups. So there's a great ecosystem developing where news companies, big established ones, are working together with smaller startups, not just mine, but many others as well. And I think that's the future for me in innovation. Use us, these startups emerging, as guinea pigs, little R&D labs for ideas you might have in a big news organization, and then fight the good fight. Because in the end of the day, we're not looking to build anything new. We're just trying to save the eternal values of journalism, the old values that inspired us all, in a world of new technology, and that deserves collaboration.
So on that theme, let's jump over to Matthew and Paul. Paul, Mark saw the power of 17-year-olds with camera phones, and in order to harness that, he left a position he'd had for 20 years and went to start his own company. A few years back, you saw the sort of potential of people out there with camera phones and mobile phones, posting news updates of their own, and you stuck within The Guardian and said, hey, we can find a way to use this in our reporting. I was hoping, one, for the benefit of those here who don't know, could you give a brief overview of what you've done with integrating that sort of stuff into your reporting? And then second, could you talk a bit about the way the newsroom and the news management at The Guardian has been set up to sort of allow you to what seems like seamlessly incorporate that stuff into what you do, because there are a lot of newsrooms out there that would not have reacted as eagerly as The Guardian seems to have done.
Okay, well, maybe I'll take the second thing first, because, I think it's really important for those of us who have the privilege of working, with a salary in a news organization, that it really matters what that news organization is like. And I think the most determining factor in terms of what will enable you to do interesting things and be entrepreneurial is probably, the leadership of that organization. So, we're quite lucky at The Guardian that editor-in-chief is Alan Rusbridger, who's a pioneer in many ways, and back in the kind of early 90s when the web was in its embryonic stage, Alan was really excited about this and wanted to put all of our content online for free, and ever since has always wanted to stay a step ahead. And that culture percolates down. So for me, as a journalist in The Guardian, it's meant that there are very few obstacles when you want to try something new. It's kind of actively encouraged. And I know I'm in a privileged position in that sense, and it's not the case for other people at other news organizations. Although I would say that, you need a few kind of ingredients to create something that you might call an innovation. And one of them actually, I think, is probably a degree of crisis. So when things are going smooth and when there's a kind of clear, obvious business model, there's no need to change. And that's not the case now. So I think there's an acceptance, even among the most reluctant news executives, that they need to try to experiment some ways. And that puts power in the hands of those of us who want to try something new. In answer to the second question, what I've done specifically, well, it probably won't sound that innovative to many of you anymore, because it's probably what you all do now. But I guess it started for me back in 2008, when I was in the office in London, and it was the Mumbai terrorist attacks, and the city was in lockdown. And, journalists at that time were so used to, in terms of seeing what was happening in the world, looking at the wire services, Reuters, Associated Press. And the kind of moment of realization, I like Mark's listening to dancing to Michael Jackson with his mother at a wedding, and mine is certainly less exciting. I was, at a desk in my office, and I had the wire services open, and you have a ticker feed, and they update every 4 or 5 minutes. You know, a report from Reuters, from Mumbai, information from the police, and it just updates every now and then. And then I had this, I didn't know what it was, but this thing called Twitter, and then it had an update. And, you know, Indians were kind of early innovators of the technology, I think. Since this, I've heard that this, you know, the plane that crashed in the Hudson River is often used as an example of the landmark moment. That was January 2009. I think it was the Mumbai attacks where many of us first realized the power of the kind of crowd. And I just looked at this feed of information, and I was just stunned because, you know, first of all, it was the quantity. You know, rather than updating every 2 or 3 minutes, every 2 or 3 seconds there were another 10 or 12 messages. And it was a kaleidoscopic representation of what was happening around the city. So that was kind of when I got really interested in it. And then ever since then, I've been trying to use different social networks, both as a means of broadcast, because there's no faster way of releasing information than through social media. But also as a kind of conversational tool, and also as a way of finding information out. And that's, I guess, where it becomes most exciting. Let me just finish quickly by saying one thing, which is that the temptation is for all of us to come up here and tell you all of the great things that we've done. The truth is, and we have to be honest, that you can only do good, interesting things if you fail every now and then. And I did some really bad things. I mean, embarrassing, and one of them that I'll share with you. When I got really interested in this Twitter stuff, this was about 4 years ago, people were talking about this new technology called Ushahidi. I don't know if some of you remember it. And this was a technology that emerged, I think, in Kenya during the elections, and it was a way of kind of geographically mapping information sent in by text message or email or Twitter. And it was kind of interesting, and I thought, well, why don't we experiment with this? And I convinced my editor to use this Ushahidi technology to try to map the visit of the Pope to the UK. So we had this papal visit, and we had a map of the UK, and the idea is that contributors would send us photographs and snippets of information and video and just comments from around the country. And it was an unmitigated disaster. I mean, this was a media-saturated event. You know, there's nothing that isn't already recorded. But it had an interesting side element because people could categorize the information that they were providing, and people kind of innovated themselves with this. So all across the UK, people were reporting miracles that were emerging in different parts of the country as a result of the Pope's visit. And, you know, it was written about in a slightly kind of critical, snarky way by some adversaries. But I'm glad that we kind of did that, because you have, through those mistakes, a process of learning. And I think later iterations of this, when we tried to do things in a slightly more sophisticated way, we realized the types of events, and this is important, the types of events that are amenable to some forms of experimental reporting, and those which actually, frankly, are not. Then you start to get better. But you do need, if you like, permission to make those mistakes.
Matthew Eltringham, can you talk about the sort of concept of needing the permission to make mistakes at a gargantuan news organization like the BBC? And I think also off of Paul's very good point about the crisis mentality that is so crucial toward actually coming to the point where, oh, geez, we need to do something different now because the old way isn't working in a sort of behemoth organization that is funded by supplements from every resident of the United Kingdom. How do you actually generate that feeling of crisis that we need to do something new because what we've been doing for so long sooner or later may no longer be relevant as relevant as it was?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think I'd first like to make the point, just picking up on a couple of things that the other guys have said, which is that, working for a big institution like the BBC, having innovative ideas and having creative thoughts isn't the problem. The problem is, as you rightly say, is actually delivering them and driving them through. And there are many, many different ways of doing that. And you need a multi-pronged strategy to achieve that. Now, the main thing, the main kind of area of innovation that I've been involved in over the last few years, and my kind of Damascene moment was, I'm afraid, a little even earlier than Michael Jackson and yours, Paul, as well. Ours was in 2004, 2005, way back before social media, before Twitter, when I was running a little bit of interactivity on the BBC News website, and the Asian tsunami happened, and that was the moment. That was Justin's moment that set a light bulb off in my head and in the head of my then boss, a woman called Vicky Taylor, who's now working at Channel 4, because we were given that was a story that was told by user-generated content, by audience film, by holidaymakers who were caught up in the tsunami, and we realised that there was something in that. There's an opportunity here for the BBC, because at that time everybody had mobile phones. They weren't these, but they were the old candy bars, and they all had most of them at that point had film capacity. So we took that idea way back in 2000, the spring of 2005, sparked off by the initial idea, to senior news executives at the BBC, and the response was lukewarm at best, frankly. There was a scepticism that the BBC is a very traditional organisation, built and broadcast. For those of you who work in television and radio, you'll understand that broadcast is also a very conservative space to work in, because it involves so much money, so much kit, that being nimble and making change in a broadcast environment is very, very difficult. So we took the idea of setting up a small team that would find and generate and share and authenticate all this kind of material that was beginning to emerge to senior executives, and they kind of went, well, what do we want it for? It wouldn't happen again, and if we did, I'm not sure we'd use it. But we were given the opportunity to set up a pilot project, and then the big crisis event happened, which made it a permanent project, which was the London bombings. And that turned us instantly, in seconds, that turned us into a permanent team. But the challenge then was not the idea. The challenge then was driving it through the institution and getting everybody else to realise that this was a really important innovation. And that involves a whole different level of set of techniques. And I think, coming at it from a big institution's perspective, it's about delivering the idea. It's not having the idea in the first place.
Matthew, I'm going to stay with you here for a second. I've always sort of believed that innovation comes from the margins. Can you talk about how sort of a big organization like the BBC might or does create opportunities for perhaps more marginal branches to actually sort of create ideas and concepts in sort of smaller teams that then might percolate onto the organization as a whole?
I think the BBC is quite. I've been at the BBC now for 17, 18 years, and I've seen quite a lot of change in the BBC over that period. From seeing the institution being quite sceptical and not welcoming of innovation and new ideas, because they are quite scary. And when you're an organisation like the BBC, you have a massive reputation to defend and to lose, and you guard your reputation and your trust very, very jealously. And the risk of losing that dominates your thinking when you're trying to innovate. So there are periods in my experience at the BBC where we haven't been particularly good at innovation. There are periods when we've been quite good at innovation, and what's been interesting about the evolution of the UGC hub is that we had a brief sprint of innovation, and then the BBC thought, great, we've done UGC, we know how that all works, so we kind of parked the innovation car in the lay-by, and then watched everybody else, The Guardian, Storyful, drive on past us, leaving us at the back of the queue again. Now, from my point of view, from a personal journalist's point of view, that was massively frustrating. Where we are now at the BBC, and what's interesting now is that with we have a slightly different management mindset, and with a few key people, and that's the other key point about driving innovation, is having the right people in the right place. With a few key people at the BBC now, we are. I think I would describe the BBC now as an extremely innovative organisation. We are not only innovating against events, we're trying to innovate. We're setting up some blue sky innovation thinking, allowing individuals and allowing small teams to go out there and think about new ideas and how might we, not even about whether they would be appropriate for the BBC, just go off and have some ideas, pulling people from different parts of the organisation together. That's the whole point of our fantastic new building in the centre of London, is pulling all the different news teams together. Whereas before, we had domestic output in West London, we had world service output in the centre of London. We now have this incredible building, new broadcasting house in the middle of London, that's everybody's in together, and the whole ethos of that building is people talking and people sharing, people running into each other in corridors, and that innovates in a very, very small way as well, because you might see, well, look what the Spanish service are doing, or the Russians. That's really interesting. We should do that as well, and you take that back to your team, and that's how the BBC is trying to take it forward in a small way, but also in big ways as well, with kind of structured labs and brainstorming. So I think as an organisation we're in quite a good place now.
I want to bring this back to Luca Sofri, but first, very quickly, off of something you just said about the idea of having the right people in the right place. Mark Little. A lot of what you do at Storyful is try to help existing news organizations that when news breaks, if they might not have the right people in the right place to cover these stories or to adequately verify a lot of the content that is coming over the wires, rather than try to create something in the spur of the moment to analyze or report this. Instead, partnering with you so that you guys can get that done. Can you talk a little bit about the idea of established newsrooms partnering with startups as a mean towards sort of quick innovation in terms of reporting stories and such?
Yeah, I think one of the mistakes I see a lot of new startups making is that they want to do something that either replaces or competes with an existing service. They want to solve a problem that no one else has thought of, and they're going to go out and they're going to boil the ocean. And what they find is when they go into a news company, they sit down with the business development manager, and the person says to them, right, I don't want you to do something that I buy from you. I don't want to outsource a function to you. I want you to make my organization better. So I remember going to a big news organization in the United States, and I sat down with this very tough business development manager who says, right, if your product makes my people work harder, I'll buy it. I thought, what do you mean by that? He said, listen, I don't want to outsource anything to you. I want you to help my people do their job better. And that was a critical moment for my business when I suddenly realized I've got to go back to the drawing board and make sure that I can, make the innovators in the news organizations look really good. I gave up any plans to have a consumer-facing model. I realized it was purely enterprise play, as we say in the startup world, going to the innovators in news organizations and giving them the tools and services that would help them break through the cultural barriers that exist. Going to the business development manager and saying, listen, I can find ways to make you money as well as me. And that idea of partnership is at the heart, I think, of any successful, innovative news company. I think the other thing we find as well is that sometimes innovation doesn't come from the bottom up, and it's not like, insurgency within a newsroom and there's a couple of really smart young people who just, put us on the team, coach, and let us go and do things. Sometimes managers come back from big conferences like these and they go into their newsroom and say, why aren't we innovating? Go off and finish the internet. And, you kind of have that sort of mentality, and then they come to me and they say, make me social. And then you go into the newsroom and you realize that actually, news organizations are built on culture, not strategy. And culturally, in those organizations, reporters still feel that social media and technology and innovation is a threat because it undermines their existing way of doing things. And so therefore, as a new startup, we sometimes get asked to go to recalcitrant parts of the organizations. I was sent to a Washington bureau of a news organization, sat there with 15 people, all over 45, sitting at me, looking at me like I was the devil, because I was coming to destroy their jobs. And I just started saying to them, I'm a journalist too. I was a foreign correspondent. I set this company up because I want to save journalism. And I think that's a key for new startups. Find the pain point and help people help themselves. Don't solve the problem for them.
So the sort of idea of newsroom culture and its importance in sort of fostering innovation, not just in the sense of, wow, like let's go finish the internet, or let's do something that involves computers, but actually intelligent, sort of focused innovation where you know where you want to go, even if you might not know how you're going to get there. Paul and Luca, I was wondering if both of you could sort of talk a little bit about that concept. Paul, in terms of how the Guardian has sort of fostered that culture and how it's what it's done for your work, and Luca, in terms of the culture that you're sort of trying to foster with ilpost, and the ways in which what you are sort of doing and how you approach your work differs from the way you're seeing much of the legacy Italian media doing the same thing. Let's start with Paul and then move over to Luca.
Well, I think this is a really important observation because within a newspaper, particularly, or a news organisation, the idea of kind of innovating for innovation's sake doesn't really carry much water. I mean, people are generally uninterested, I think, in the creation of a quirky new device or a new way of a new concept of cultivating a community. It might be the kind of fashionable thing, but ultimately the thing that is most persuasive within a news organisation, the currency that we trade on as journalists, is stories, is journalism. And so I always try to think about if I'm doing the very important thing, which is dealing with office politics, is selling your idea internally, what's the story? Otherwise, often you're kind of creating a whole new bureaucracy. You're creating more mechanisms. You're creating what news organizations need less of. But if you think in terms of stories and you think in terms of journalism, I mean, there's a whole other side of this, which is kind of making money, which is business, which is not something is my domain. But I think we should kind of reconsider innovation as a kind of in a view to kind of obtaining journalistic fruit. So if I think about the big thing I did last year, after the riots in the UK, which was the kind of biggest bout of civil unrest disorder that we had in 3 decades, there was no agreement in the country as to what had caused those riots. 6 people dead, £500 million worth of damage, 15,000 people breaking into shops, starting fires, fighting with police, and no one really understood why it had happened. And I like reading blogs like Neiman blog and stuff about the future, but I also love reading journalism from the past. I think it can teach us a lot. And I was reading a study from 1967 in the Detroit riots, where a university teamed up with a newspaper and conducted a big piece of social research. They went out and they interviewed people in the community in Detroit. And so the question was, can we do something like this within the Guardian? Can we try to answer that question? Why did the riots begin? What were the causes and the consequences of that disorder? By teaming up with the university. Now, if I just said that to my bosses, they would probably have been uninterested. But what I was promising them was kind of interesting news stories, a conclusion, front pages. Then you get into the second tier, which is the mechanics of it. And of course, you need a sense of momentum. Of course, you need money. We were lucky to get money from 2 foundations. But money is really critical for many of these things because they simply cost. And then you need institutional support. But on the question of institutional support, I think the most persuasive argument you can have is this will create us interesting, new, relevant public interest journalism. And I think if you're not doing that, if you're just saying it will be interesting, if you're simply saying other news organizations are doing this, why don't we? If you're saying it involves social media, so it kind of ticks a box, you'll be less persuasive.
Mi fa piacere che Paul abbia citato lui quel momento dei riots a Londra di 2 stati fa, perché come diciamo, devo dire mi sono ricordato adesso, perché sono giorni molto concitati di molte fonti, ma lui è lo stesso Paul Lewis che per noi del Post fu, per tutti quanti, ma diciamo qui in Italia ci fu meno attenzione a quelle cose, per noi del Post fu tra i primissimi a andare per strada dove stavano succedendo i casini e a cominciare a twittare in diretta il suo racconto da lì, prima ancora diciamo che il suo racconto diventasse nella forma più tradizionale, gli articoli per il Guardian eccetera, e fu preziosissimo, appunto tra l'altro seguivo io personalmente quei giorni lì perché appunto erano dei giorni, non so se per estate o perché siamo sempre un po' a corto di risorse al Post, diciamo eravamo abbastanza in affanno e appunto mi ricordo appunto tutti i nomi dei nostri reporter sul campo, cioè Paul era insieme a essere reporter di molti altri in tutto il mondo uno di quelli che ci raccontavano meglio quei giorni. Perché mi interessa anche a me citare quel momento? Perché ci attacco un esempio per dire quanto diciamo, basti poco a cambiare un po' le teste il nostro atteggiamento. Lo dico in un posto dove so che ci sono moltissimi giovani italiani in cerca di spazi in questo lavoro e molti molto brillanti e secondo me di grandi potenzialità, ma che hanno bisogno di fare un po' diciamo, un salto di pensiero. E non è colpa loro, è colpa diciamo, in generale del quadro del contesto italiano. In quei giorni mi scrisse una ragazza da Londra, moltissimi ci scrivono ogni giorno chiedendo o offrendo di collaborare col Post, mi scrisse una ragazza italiana dicendo sono a Londra per un po', vuoi che ti scriva qualcosa di che cosa sta succedendo qui? Era una ragazza che non avevo mai conosciuto né sentito e la sua offerta era gentile e interessante, ma in quel caso le spiegai una cosa particolare e molto interessante. Le dissi guarda che qualunque cosa tu mi racconti da lì, da Londra, una delle città più illuminate del pianeta, sarà meno di quello che io sono in grado di capire qui a Milano davanti al mio computer, no? Non ho bisogno di qualcuno che mi racconti da Londra su una storia di questo genere. Eventualmente potrei aver bisogno, nemmeno bisogno, ma diciamo una parte accessoria interessante del racconto è se tu ti trovi esattamente davanti alla vetrina nel momento in cui quelli stanno spaccando una vetrina e mi racconti quindi un pezzetto della storia da lì, un pezzetto della storia che può essere interessante. Però ti sconsiglio di essere davanti alla vetrina nel momento in cui stanno spaccando la vetrina e quindi diciamo generalmente, però a parte questa storia appunto, questo vi racconta come dei canoni e dei meccanismi tradizionali, poi vi sto parlando del Post, ci sono molti giornali e luoghi di informazione in cui le cose vengono fatte diversamente anche con delle ragioni, però come molti meccanismi tradizionali, approcci tradizionali al racconto e all'informazione siano cambiati per molti, al Post sono molto cambiati e molto diversi, possiamo oggi accedere ai racconti qualificati, esperti di Paul e di molti altri come lui nel momento in cui succede una cosa del genere, tanto da non aver nemmeno bisogno di una ragazza italiana che magari in italiano ci scrive una cosa da lì, ma non conoscendo minimamente il territorio e non avendo particolari esperienze giornalistiche. Noi riceviamo tantissime offerte e richieste di collaborazione, come vi dicevo, per noi sono molto naturalmente lusinghiere e un po' frustranti perché il 95% di queste richieste si esauriscono in mi piace molto il Post, vorrei tanto lavorare per il Post, cosa che vi dico è lusinghiera ma non ci offre nessun elemento di comprensione di che cosa tu possa offrire per il Post, al Post. E questa è una cosa che ho suggerito e cercato di spiegare molto ai ragazzi di un corso che abbiamo fatto quest'inverno alla scuola Holden di Torino. Perché mi ha colpito che dei ragazzi che venissero a un corso tenuto da me, sapendo chi sono, sapendo il giornale che facciamo, che si chiamava Sull'informazione online, avessero nella loro gran parte come modello e come ambizione di riuscita nel giornalismo contemporaneo di trovare un modo di entrare dentro una redazione di grandi giornali italiani, a avere una scrivania e scrivere delle cose che siano nel migliore dei casi per il Corriere della Sera oppure per Grazia oppure non so cosa, e scrivere degli tradizionali articoli come quelli che oggi vedono su questi giornali e fare quelle cose lì, no? Questo per me è stato molto rivelatore della permanenza in questo paese di una cultura conservatrice che si tramanda anche sui giovani su come si fa l'informazione. E chiudo, ho avuto la fortuna che in quel gruppo lì ci fosse un ragazzo che è povero, ormai è diventato da me citato ovunque come esempio, lo citerò ancora qui, che fa due cose su internet, due blog diversi. Uno è un blog di politica e attualità, lui è uno molto curioso, attento, segue e scrive delle cose personali, di riflessione e analisi sull'attualità e sulla politica, non ha mai fatto il giornalista, però appunto è sveglio in gamba e segue le cose, curioso. E scrive delle cose scritte piuttosto bene, ogni tanto un po' prolisso, insomma un po' di cose, però scrive piuttosto bene con grande attenzione e cultura appunto su temi di attualità e politica. E poi ha un blog di pronostici sportivi, insieme a un suo amico, dove scrivono dei post sui vari eventi sportivi e calcistici, soprattutto, in cui analizzano tutti i dati, gli elementi precedenti, le cose, eccetera, e espongono appunto quale sarà probabilmente il risultato secondo loro. Questo blog è dedicato a quelli che poi vanno a scommettere sui siti di scommesse. Adesso, come dico sempre, dico anche a lui, accantoniamo la questione etica di cosa pensiamo delle scommesse sportive e dei siti di scommesse. Nel suo blog, diciamo, ci sono le affiliazioni con i siti di scommesse, per cui voi andate, leggete quali sono i loro pronostici, che sono fatti bene, qualificati, competenti, e dopo cliccate sul link al sito di scommesse e andate a scommettere lì, e lui li riceve per ognuno, diciamo, che va a finire sul sito di scommesse, una quota dei guadagni. E con questo sistema loro ogni mese portano a casa 1 migliaio di euro, che non è una roba che ci campi, no? Però, diciamo, per un ragazzo giovane sono 4 soldi in più da portare a casa. Allora, quello che io ho detto a lui, e ho detto a tutti, a me di te quello che mi interessa è la seconda cosa. La prima, ne trovo 100, ne trovo 1000 di bravi e brillanti che seguono la politica e mi scrivono degli articoli conclusi e dignitosi sulla politica e l'attualità. Questo mondo, questo momento, il Post, ma un sacco di altre istituzioni, hanno bisogno di qualcuno che intuisca i meccanismi nuovi che funzionano in rete, che li sappia padroneggiare, che li sappia mettere in pratica e che ci sappia tirar fuori dei soldi per sostenerli, no? Che si tratti di scommesse sportive, a me in questo momento non mi interessa. Mi interessa che se tu hai una testa così e hai un'inclinazione così, no? Per me tu sei uno, diciamo, che è capace di prendere delle iniziative, capire delle opportunità, costruirci sopra una cosa e propormele. A me piacerebbe, per questo dico sempre questa cosa del giornalismo e la tecnologia, poi sapendo che si mescolano molto, eccetera. Mi piacerebbe molto che il flusso di offerte adesso, diciamo, non mi assalite domani con un sacco di proposte tecnologiche deliranti, perché non ho il tempo nemmeno di leggere le mail, nemmeno se sono geniali, però mi piacerebbe che ci fosse una quota cospicua di tutti quelli che scrivono al Post, che proponesse delle idee nuove, che proponesse delle cose a cui noi non abbiamo pensato, che non ci scrivesse ho collaborato col Tirreno di Livorno, le mando un paio di miei articoli sul Tirreno di Livorno, perché io sono contento per te, sono affezionato al Tirreno di Livorno perché sono di Pisa, però non ha niente a che fare con le prospettive e le cose nuove che si possono costruire e che abbiamo bisogno di costruire. Da capo non sto parlando del Post, sto parlando di un suggerimento per le teste di tutti quanti, appunto, quelli giovani che vogliono fare queste cose. Inventatevi altro, non rifate le cose che vedete fatte come sono adesso.
Mark Little, that idea of knowing what people can offer that Luca was just talking about, can you discuss that as it relates to running a small startup and your experiences of the sorts of people that you need to surround yourself with in order to actually get stuff done, and what happens when you find that you've picked someone who might not actually be as up to the task as you thought they might?
So my company has a staff of 29 people in Ireland, in the United States, and in Asia. And I was looking around the other day at the CVs, the resumes of the people that work for me, and I realized how few of them actually have formal education in journalism. My managing editor, he is a journalist and was a journalist for a long time, also managed a sailing school in the Caribbean, a tea plantation in Kenya. I have another friend who I employed who speaks Gaelic and Korean. And I realized that the skills of all these people were totally non-traditional. As one of them said, like, we're like the X-Men. Have you ever seen that movie, you know, all the mutants and the misfits? And I like that. I like the idea that we look for people who show a sense of curiosity. I was struck by Luca's example of the people that attract him. I'm attracted by the same people who actually understand that, when I started off in journalism 20 years ago, we traded in scarcity, right? So we owned the means of production and distribution of news. And we were the people who gathered scarce facts and presented them to a passive audience, like the voice of God. And now today, journalists are the managers of overabundance of information. They are people who the rest of us look to because we trust you, trust us, let us know, you're the expert in something, help us understand this wall of information coming at me. And when I employ people, I look for that skill to be able to take a piece of content and data, do something inventive and turn it, as Paul said earlier, into a story that has a beginning, middle, and end. So what I look for is people who are not afraid of risk, who will come to me and say, give me a chance to fail. And that's for me. We were joking last night. I proposed that we have a conference just dedicated to failure. Nothing else, right? We're going to call it Flounders, and we're just going to ask everyone to come along and tell us about their failures. And I'm attracted to people who have this sort of risk-taking, almost in some way sort of suicidal bent on going out and trying a new idea and see how quickly they can screw up so they can learn. And my advice to everybody is, I've only ever learned from my failures. I've never learned from my successes, because successes in many ways are about luck, timing, persistence, survival. If you stay around long enough, you'll succeed at some point. And so what we do inside Storyful is I have a 6-week test. If you can do something in 6 weeks and either make it a success or a failure, that's all you've got. You've got no longer. So come to me and tell me some groundbreaking idea. And if you're comfortable with that idea of failing and failing quickly, then I want you as part of my team. Finally, I would say I got a lot of people saying to me when I was a journalist in a big organization, how do I get your job? And, that's the wrong question. I think the question is, how do I sustain a future in journalism? And I would advise any young journalist to be setting up their blogs, have their Twitter account, their YouTube account, and find niches, find places that you see that are not being covered properly. It could be your local city hall, it could be sport, it could be betting, and find something and make it your own and craft some sort of distinct, unique offering, because journalists have to be thinking about enterprise and branding and what they do and what value they bring. And in value comes a business model. But you can't just invent something. The final thing I just would say, and I'm sorry to go on about it because I'm struck by some of the things I'm hearing about big organizations. And one of the things about innovation is it's not invention. You're not trying to come up with something new. You're just taking stuff that's out there already and making it work in a slightly different way. So the biggest tools that Storyful uses are not stuff, we have our own proprietary technology, but it's, Google Street View, Geophidia, tools that are out there already that we just take and use in a slightly innovative way. Sometimes we even use telephones. And I think, from my point of view, that's the key to the people that I want to hire, is who look at the world in a slightly different way, iconoclastic, perhaps, certainly non-traditional. Most of all, people who like the idea of trying something. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, even better, you learn a lesson.
Taking something that's out there and making it work in a slightly different way. I'd like to bring it back to Paul and Matthew with that sentiment off of something that, Paul, you once said about how you think that journalism is actually quite a flexible term, which I think is a very sort of interesting idea, and one that I think a lot of editors I know might disagree with. Could you and maybe Matthew sort of talk a bit about that concept, both in terms of in general and perhaps in terms of working with larger organizations, of taking something that was so rigidly defined for so long, go out, find what's happening, and write it up, and trying to find these flexibilities, these new nuances in this idea, and making them work in a sort of interesting, innovative fashion.
Well, I guess what I meant when I said journalism is kind of a flexible concept is that we're in this. I mean, this isn't new to anyone, and we've been having these discussions for a few years now. But there's this kind of paradox whereby you have fewer and fewer paid journalists in the world, but more and more journalism. More and more people doing things. I mean, you can contest this, and you can say, well, it's not journalism if it's not a journalist doing it, or if it's not journalism unless it's been properly verified. But I just think the act of recording something, witnessing something, interpreting it, and then sharing it to people, not always, but often looks and feels like journalistic activity to me. So the kind of big foundational question that I've been grappling with for a long time is how you, as a journalist, adapt to that. There's no point in resisting it. There's no point saying you don't like that or you object to it or it's not as good as it used to be, but how you adapt to it and how you seek to exploit all of those possibilities. But it's just, sometimes I kind of step back and think, well, actually, what's counterintuitive may be where we kind of end up, because it may be that doing the really kind of traditional stuff is what becomes innovative. That so many journalists will be so over-reliant upon understanding stories through their computer screen that those who stand out will be those who are physically there. And Luca kindly mentioned my work on the riots, but I think it's different to how other journalists would utilize that technology. I genuinely believe that the best place to be as a journalist is on the scene. And, I don't think you can, in a kind of comprehensive way, tell a story as a distant witness. Often what we're kind of talking about has to be done so with a certain degree of caveat. But I think there's a positive side to all of this, which is that, journalism has always been, even kind of pre-internet, right? But ever since it began, it's always been about the people it's attracted have been people who are kind of entrepreneurial and are willing to use their initiative. So, to give you an example, somebody goes to a press conference, and those journalists who are kind of run-of-the-mill and standard and maybe will never rise to the surface are those who will just take down notes of what's said at the press conference and act as stenographers, report it in a kind of faithful way. And the journalists who are more successful will be more curious, and they will think of other methods that are available to them to try to find out what the real story is. They'll go around the back door. They'll do anything from kind of cultivating a source or stealing a piece of paper off the desk or phone hacking or whatever it might be. But they'll try to think creatively. And maybe not phone hacking. Yeah. But that's kind of essentially what we're talking about. There are some professions that you would not want to innovate. I mean, a brain surgeon, for example, or a pilot. You don't want them to be too experimental. But journalists, you can put in the domain of, chefs. Those who just follow recipes are probably going to be less successful than those who think more creatively. But that's always been the case. That's always been the case with journalists. If you're in a war situation, you need to think very creatively about how you tell the story to preserve your own safety and to get the story at the same time. And now we're in this new situation in which, as I said, fewer and fewer journalists, more and more people doing journalism. The tools are available to us are expanding. There are new tools constantly. I struggle to just keep up. That's one of the big issues. But that's an exciting place to be. I want to say one other thing here, which is I can understand how it must be very frustrating for some people. And I count myself in this category because, sometimes you come to these events and you go away with the message that if you kind of create a good brand and if you have a kind of degree of identity and if you use social media, you'll somehow succeed. But the kind of harsh economic truth of the fact is that that's not the case. So, I sometimes wonder whether journalism is going to become something which, for most people who do it, is a voluntary exercise. It's a harsh reality, but it may well have to be the case. So I think, again, stepping back, one of the most, although I believe the thing that you can do within an institution if you want to try and experiment is sell stories, one of the place, if you really want to be on the kind of cutting edge of all of this, is thinking about really inventive ways of making money. And, some forms of crowdsourcing have worked, but not really. Let's be honest, crowdfunding, you can raise a few thousand euros, but never huge amount. Foundation journalism, again, at the fringes, is doing something quite interesting. But, and it's an impossible question because no one has properly solved it. But if you can be the person who comes up with something which provides journalism which kind of is so useful or so valuable or so different, the way in which it's consumed is so different that people are willing to depart with their money, then I think you're kind of onto something. But you knew that already.
Yeah, Matthew, your thoughts, and I'd also encourage you, if you'd like, to talk a bit about how your work at the BBC College of Journalism sort of helps position people to do the sort of creative work by giving them the training they might need.
That's exactly the point I was going to make, actually, Justin. I mean, the first thing I'd like to say is, in many ways for institutions, there's got to be a point to innovation. I mean, just having all these wild and wacky ideas doesn't, is great on one level from an individual's point of view. You having the freedom and the space to do that, that's fantastic. But looking at it from an institutional, from an organisational point of view, what does this innovation, does this creative development and direction serve our core editorial purpose? So working that through. Otherwise, you lose focus and you lose what you're doing. I think, as Justin said, I mean, there are a couple of other key points as well like that kind of are important in terms of kind of taking that kind of journalism and innovation forward. Picking up on some of the points that Paul and Mark have talked about, the bottom line is what's in it for me. I mean, yes, it's about the journalism, but ultimately, journalists are people full of egos. That's why they. Honestly, Mark, I'm sorry, they are. They really are. And the bottom line is what's in it for me. If I can make myself, my programme, my newspaper, my section look better, then I'm going to do it. If I'm not, why would I do it? What's the point? And enabling that to happen is creating the right culture. And creating the right culture, you can do. There are two key things you need to do to create the right culture. One is get senior management buy-in. If you're working in an institution, you need the big people to give the rest of the organisation, to give the people who actually, by and large, have the ideas, the guys who are doing the job on a day-to-day basis, permission to kind of have the thoughts and have the ideas. And it's really, there is many examples of within the BBC where key people, as soon as key people got the idea, it instantly unlocked all this innovation within the organisation. Kevin Backhurst, who now who used to run the BBC's news channel, and now runs pretty much the whole of RTE. That's right. He was on Twitter for some time. Kind of went, yeah, I kind of get the point of it. He then had a couple of stories that he was involved in, and he suddenly saw the point of Twitter. At which point he then said to me at the College of Journalism, the BBC's training arm, right, I want all my producers, I want my entire staff to go through social media training to understand what it really means and and the impact it can really have on their journalism. So he unlocked all of that and allowed his team and his staff to have the training and gave them institutional permission to kind of experiment and go out there. So what we did then at the College of Journalism, and what we've done over the last 2 or 3 years, is give people the ability to use tools like social media. First of all, helping them to understand on a very basic level what buttons to press, and what how Twitter works and how Twitter doesn't work, and what the right things to say and the right things to do are, and searching and all of that kind of stuff. So again, looking at it from an institutional perspective, it's about giving people the skills, and then it's supporting them with those in those skills. So we would then, after having put all these producers through a morning long, a 3 or 4 hour long training course, we would then actually go and work with them in the newsroom to support them, because 9 times out of 10 these journalists would go, that's all very well, but I'm too busy. I've got phone calls to make, I've got newspapers to read, I've got programs to put out. But if you can then go in and work with them on the shop floor, so to speak, and set up their Twitter account with them, sat by you, work with them on individual stories, they suddenly get it. They suddenly go, I can see what's in it for me now, I'm going to do it.
We have time for maybe 2 questions from the audience. Please raise your hands, and someone with a microphone will be around. There's someone right down here in the front.
Hello. I write about technology and tech startups and that huge innovation engine that is the tech business. But actually, something that's not talked about in my world too much is that with each gain in technology, you gain something and you lose something. So my question for you is, within your organization, what are you not prepared to lose in this pursuit of the new? And how do you make that trade-off and decide that you're prepared to lose something in order to gain whatever new thing it is that you're getting?
It's a great question.
On that one, because that's for me, back to that cognitive dissonance notion, you know, like I want to create something new, but if I go after that, I'm going to lose what I already have. So with a startup, you've got a limited amount of money. You know, you have to take risks, but you've got to do it quickly and make sure that you're, you know, keeping the core value. The problem for big news organizations is they're starting from where they are right now, right? They want to preserve their business model and have, you know, the newspaper printed on newspaper, while at the same time innovating on digital. And that's a really difficult place to be. I find with innovators, working with innovators, what's really liberating is that they understand that, you know, they will die if they don't innovate, you know, they don't do it quickly. And so just to give you a test case of how this works, for me, journalism today, if you think about it from the bottom up, not the top down, it is a mass of people out there, the crowd, who suddenly have the means to produce content. And 72 hours of YouTube video is uploaded every single minute. So there's people in there, in that crowd, who once in their life will commit an act of journalism, and never again. And then there's a group of people above that who are amateurs, but who are motivated to be the gatekeepers and the influencers, who will look out for that kind of content so they can share it with the rest of the world. And then on top of that is another layer of journalists, like the old sub-editor, who literally is just watching the crowd to see what they're doing, listening to their conversations, engaging with them, being very humble and asking them for their help. And then above them are the storytellers, who take all this information, turn it into narrative. And if you think about it like that, suddenly you have a guide to your innovation. So we have a particularly gifted engineer who is working on a project, and we wanted to see the behavior of these crowds. Who are the wisdom in the crowd? Can we identify them? Because they don't look like us. We go to a guy on Twitter called Brown Moses to seek advice on munitions in Syria. He sits in, I think, a basement. He's an amateur, complete amateur, but he's consistently right. And so we wanted to find out how do people like these emerge? And our guy built a little hack that looks at Reddit, and we can now we discover most of the good content we get from that simple, small little hack that took 2 hours, rather than, you know, the big projects that are taking us weeks and months. So I think the way the final answer to your question would be, find the behavior of the crowd, look at what journalism is today, and find the small things that you can do that take 2 hours, not 2 months. Do them and just incrementally build up the new, little layer by layer. More understanding of what your market is. And layer by layer, you suddenly find, oh, I'm surviving. My head's above water. Now I can go and take a bigger risk. And that's key for a startup. Small steps, failure, turn around, pivot, go forward again. But do it quickly, in increments, and do it with an understanding of what the world is and not what you want it to be, and not where you are today. You know, and I think they're my advice for startups is, you know, fail quickly, and essentially just survive. You'll work it out eventually.
Success is survival,
Yes.
as they say.
Culture eats strategy and all those buzzwords.
Oh, we love buzzwords up here. Other questions? Right over there.
Buongiorno, la mia è una testimonianza. La mia è più una testimonianza e un invito. Sono tunisina e ho partecipato al movimento della rivolta tunisina dall'Italia e volevo dire che in Tunisia in questo momento c'è una grandissima innovazione, c'è un movimento enorme di cambiamento a livello del giornalismo. Dalla caduta della propaganda del regime che chiudeva totalmente lo spazio giornalistico a una liberazione, una libertà totale che però sta vedendo un posto enorme di quello che è il giornalismo cittadino, che si è trasformato dalla famosa telecamera, telefonino che riprende dal terreno della rivolta a oggi un movimento molto molto sviluppato e molto ricco di innovazione nel modo di fare giornalismo, in un modo anche poco strutturato certe volte, ma che sta dando tantissimi risultati ottimi, è vero, a livello locale, non se ne parla, nessuno viene a vedere quello che sta avvenendo, quindi vi invito a dare uno sguardo a quanto sta avvenendo in Tunisia, perché è veramente un modo ottimo di vedere il cross media, di vedere delle produzioni di informazioni che arrivano sia dal terreno sia da un'elaborazione ancora più alta verso l'alto, una cosa veramente eccezionale, quindi vi invito a venire a vedere.
Thank you for the kind invitation. But I think that's very interesting, and I'd love to actually see it firsthand, right?
That's a good point about innovation. We all assume innovation will come from Silicon Valley, New York, London, wherever the media capitals. I was talking to people yesterday about Mozambique, where there's an election approaching, and they're going over there to help a newspaper, which is this remarkable model, which is based on SMS. And we all think about Twitter, we think about Facebook. In Africa, innovation's happening through mobile phones and SMS. In China, Weibo is revolutionizing the way people talk to each other, not Twitter. And I think your point is absolutely right. I remember when Sidi Bouzid, that phrase trended on Twitter first, and no one knew what it meant. We had to look to people like you to say, what does it mean and what's the context? So I think that's a really important point. Innovation will not come from Silicon Valley in the end of the day for news. It'll come from people like you, probably.
Just let's not forget, though, that often information that's travelling through the internet is wrong. And the more information that we have and the more people have the tools to do their own kind of mini inquiries, I think the more we're seeing mistakes being made. I won't recap what happened with the Boston bombings. And so that's a really interesting observation from a journalistic perspective, because when Luca mentioned the riots, I remember one of the feelings I had there was, this is a real equalizer. What I'm doing is no different to what the person next to me is doing. If we both take a video, it will look and feel exactly the same. One's a journalist, the other isn't. It looks and feels exactly the same. So what is different? What can I bring to the table that's different? And I think the answer is basically trust. So the previous question was, what can you not lose in all of this? And I think there's a kind of always been an implicit contract between journalist and reader or user, which is that what we're providing to you, we believe to be true, and the closest obtainable version of the truth. And that is what I would hope in the kind of rush to try new things, that we don't lose. Because if you lose that, then you're really damaged, because you're no different to the people who are doing journalism but are not paid to do it.
What can I bring to the table that's different? If there's one takeaway from the 4 panels we did this week, I think it's that. Asking ourselves as journalists and as citizens of this new sort of media environment, that question. What am I doing that's different? What is my competitive advantage? What do I bring that others do not bring? Discovering that and then acting on that is, I think, the best advice that I can give in general, the best answer to the question, how to do good journalism when all the odds are against you. And with that, we are unfortunately out of time. I would like to thank the panelists for a robust discussion. From my left, we have Matthew Eltringham from the BBC College of Journalism, Mark Little from Storyful, Paul Lewis from The Guardian, and Luca Sofri from ilpost. I'm Justin Peters from the Columbia Journalism Review. I'd like to thank all of you for coming today and all week. It's always a pleasure to come to Perugia and this festival, and with luck, I and the rest of us will see you all next year. Thank you very much.